myself a drink. I'll just say sorry. My computer crashed. Had a blue screen and sad face. So hopefully we've got the second presentation here now.
Like colors from the flag.
Yeah, we're gonna discuss colors today.
No,
not color theory.
the great leader.
Yeah. I was actually thinking about looking into propaganda games in North Korea, but I kind of thought that would kind of be a bit difficult,
Yeah.
considering the reliability of information and those things.
Then you had to go and make an interview.
Yeah.
Ja, IMT4007. Väldigt hett Man såg ju konkurs då. Vet. Kia. Quello è stato un voto. Quello è stato un voto. Good. Good. That's your boost. In boosted, don't boost. No. Because it's such a. Oh.
What are you guys watching?
It's this Synchro Cinema. It's the guys from Kosovo. They dub famous movies.
Oh.
And they just stop bullshit.
So what do you guys think about the way we do it? In Norway, we don't sub it. We just when we don't dub it, we sub it.
No. We also it's just but this is like very funny, you know. They just talk bullshit. They don't talk anything that's on the movie
related to the movie. No,
nothing at all. That's all like no. And that's
swearing, like
yeah. And it's kind of funny because it's kind of synchronized, you know, but
det var det första dagen du mätte i Twitter.
Fick du tag någon gameplay? Fick du tag någon gameplay-video?
Inte gameplay-video. Tre screenshots totalt.
Som bra spelare bara från demo.
Bra serverspelare.
Faktiskt att hålla på med också spill. Faktiskt att ha information på massa spill.
Jag har inte sett på det. Men det är vanligtvis lika populärt med andra.
There's a lot of weird stuff around how China and Japan treat each other.
Yeah, it's
Um,
kind of a strange relationship, sort of.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And you know, even apologizing for stuff. It's they're not great at Western countries aren't great at apologizing either. So, but there seems to be some lots of really delicate kind of negotiations and face saving and kind of trying to point out and very real threats currently still on the whole South China Sea, where the Chinese are creating islands. I think it's one of the
like that. Yeah.
so one of the current discussions is because you own the sea around islands that you own, they're going and finding things that were just below the water level, and they're going and putting stuff there until it's above the water level and saying that's now a Chinese island. So expanding borders by creating land, and I see Norway has much harder job of doing that in the North Atlantic, right? So in the I've forgotten the name for the strait between
Svalbard.
Well, Svalbard you have, right? But no, there's stuff in the North Sea, right? Between there are some shallow areas, and you guys could almost do the same thing. You could create some islands in the middle of the North Sea. Then that would be very interesting to say, well, we own more of the oil now. Yeah. Right? But no, Norway's not kind of that aggressive, right? It's not kind of trying to piss off the UK quite so much. But there was a lot of active discussion around where you put the line down the center of the North Sea around distance from land and stuff. And Lofoten, what point in Lofoten do you use as the furthest point to carve the line and stuff? I still think that Norway should have gone in with Scotland and told Scotland to join Norway and leave England and create a North Sea Union, which I think would have been very interesting. But there was a lot of propaganda around the yes/no vote in Scotland.
Interesting.
But no, because so the Orkneys and the Shetland Islands were owned by Norway and were given to Scotland because Norway, they're quite a long way from Norway, but if you'd kept them, you would have owned the whole of the North Sea and all the North Sea oil, right? Because England's territory would have been, well, the UK would have been significantly reduced. The fact that the Scots have more in common with the Norwegians than they do with the English, and kind of genetically and stuff. So yeah, but it's a.
They do.
So a lot of certainly the Orkneys and the Shetlands are genetically Norwegian, and they have Norwegian place names and they have Norwegian family names, and it was a Norwegian settlement.
Was that because we invited them when we were Vikings or something?
That's because there were no Celts living there, and yes, Norwegians settled on the islands.
Okay.
And they only people living there because only the Vikings were crazy enough to try and live on those islands.
Okay.
So yeah, no, they were settled by the Vikings, and so they were all Norwegian blood. So yeah,
All right.
that's who settled there. But yeah, okay. So Martin,
Yes.
present.
So I'm going to discuss or give you guys a brief overview of the paper named Gaming, Nationalism, and Ideological Work in Contemporary China, Online Games Based on the War of Resistance Against the Japan. So it's kind of a very long title, sort of, and yeah, back to that. So what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to start with talking about the paper in general. I'll talk a bit about the structure and sort of what it's all about. I'll give you guys some historical background and sort of give you a taste of what the paper tries to tell you when it comes to the history of how games and the relationship between the Chinese people and sort of the propaganda system has been developing from the 1990s until the 2006, 7, 8-ish. And we're going to discuss a game called Resistance War Online, which is kind of what this paper based itself on pretty much, although it mentions many, many other games. it's sort of what's the main focus throughout the paper. And I'll talk about what's the effects of resistance word online, and I'll come up with some conclusion in the end. So the structure of the paper is, as Gregor mentioned in his presentation, these papers quite differs a lot from other scientific papers we've been discussing. So in the previous papers we've been discussing so far, there's some sort of experiment, and they have some numbers, and they have theories that they want to test out. Well, here it's more like an analysis of certain events. And what they basically do, they base their discussion around news articles, forum posts, and various interviews in the paper. And they say that the purpose of the study is to advance our understanding of the complexity of contemporary Chinese nationalism, China's commercialized cultural industry, and the party state's effort to reinforce propaganda work in the internet era. So what they're saying here is that they want to give us some sort of understanding of how the Chinese are sort of enforcing or trying to incorporate propaganda into games and online games, where it's kind of the main focus of this paper, and how that's kind of developed from the early days of the computers and until the modern age of the internet, where we sort of have this huge network and we can share information very easily, where the Chinese government sort of have the reputation where they sort of want to restrict very much, and they want to be in very much control over what their population knows about various topics and what's sort of in the news out there. So in the 1990s, the Chinese and the Japanese sort of, they're not on good terms, sort of in many various ways. You sort of had the resistance war during World War II, which I'll get back to later. And in the 1990s, they were not very happy with each other due to various political issues. And there were many patriotic games that sort of sprang out of that relationship. And one of the paper states that one of the most, or what they claim is one of the most important events that sort of contributed to this was that the fact that the Chinese started testing nuclear weapons, and the Japanese reacted to that by stopping aid towards China. And they were not very happy with that. And in general, most of the games at this period, they were not Chinese in the Chinese market. And most of the games that were Chinese, according to the paper, was patriotic games, which was based around the relationship between the Chinese and the Japanese. And yes, so there was, they had some sort of, gaming in China had some kind of bad reputation due to various events, and the Chinese government was mostly based around the addiction and the violence aspect of games. They were not exactly sure, or they didn't know at that time that it could be used for good purpose. They were more focused on restricting games and stuff like that. And the paper also says one event where an internet cafe where sort of, I think it was 18 or 20 people got killed because they were locked in during the night because they wanted to play games during the night. And they were locked in there, and then there was a fire in there, and they couldn't get out because they were locked in. And the window were sealed with grids and everything, and it was kind of a tragedy. And this kind of contributed to the negative that the Chinese sort of had towards games in general. And the paper states that many people compare games to heroin and drugs and those kinds of things. And yeah, and some people were kind of addicted, and yeah. And this was before online gaming became sort of a huge thing because they didn't have the infrastructure for that yet. And yeah, but this kind of changed in 2001 when an online game called Legend was released, and this was sort of considered to be a huge game changer in the Chinese history of games, since this sort of made was the first, according to the paper, the first online game that was very, very popular in 2001. And this sort of made the government see that this is actually very popular among young people, and it's something that they can earn money on. And in 2001, Jiang Zemin, which I think was the prime minister or something in China at that time, he said he compared the internet to a political and ideological and cultural battlefield. And they sort of started seeing that this is something that could be used for good. And due to the fact that most of the games at that time, which I think I mentioned earlier, were not Chinese, they were imported from outside of China, and those were the most popular games. Around 68% of the imported of the games that were in China were imported in 2003. And the government sort of started changing and introducing several policies and barriers in order to make it harder for foreign developers to reach users in China and sort of try and invest in the Chinese market and sort of bring that to life, since this was clearly something that they need to come up with. There were some people that said in the China Youth Daily that China needs to tell their own story because they cannot be narrated by countries outside of China on their own history, for example, especially when it comes to resistance war, where China should tell their own story to their own people, according to the government, or at least this paper. And yeah, in 2004, there was a screening commission that was established. So in order for online games to be played in China, they sort of had to be approved and had to come through some sort of approval process, where one of the criteria in order for them to get approved was that they had to be part of the company that had the online game had to be based in China. So they had to have some joint venture there in order for it to be allowed to be played on the Chinese markets. And yes, and it had to also be approved. And the government started to see that and identify games and online games in general as a cultural element and a cultural product, sort of, which had to be sort of controlled and checked towards what the government was trying to say. And yes, so let's get back to Resistance War Online. And briefly said, Resistance War Online is a game where you take part in the resistance war against Japan. And that was a war that occurred during World War II in 1937 towards 1945. And it was developed by a company called PowerNet Technology. And this was later renamed to CQGame.com after a reform that they introduced later on. And the story behind this started with that the Communist Youth League of China, they wanted to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the resistance war against Japan. And they had sort of a bidding process where developers could come with an idea or a bid, and they could win that bid, and the government would start to invest and give them benefits for implementing that game. And PowerNet Technologies won this bid with Resistance War Online. However, at this time, it was not named Resistance War Online, but it was named Anti-Japan Online. And when they were developing it, it sort of leaked out towards Japan that they're working on a game called Anti-Japan Online, and the Japanese didn't like that, and they sort of started publishing news articles about that. and that put a lot of pressure on the company behind Resistance War Online. And the Chinese government didn't like that very much. They don't know, you have to stop saying that. That's bad. And you sort of have to tone things down, and you have to follow what's written in our textbooks, according to the paper. And that's kind of that's sort of the point around this process where the Chinese government forces the developers to follow strictly a specification that they give them. Either it's an ideology or it's a piece of history or something, because the history around the Resistance War has in fact changed according to various sources in the paper, where in the 1990s, the Chinese were going to go through a unification with Taiwan, where, as far as I understand it, that they actually acknowledged several parties in the Resistance War, and one of them were the nationalists, the nationalist resistance force during the Resistance War. And that was kind of new. They didn't want to recognize them before that. And that sort of sprang into their history books. And this is one of the examples of that kind of modern history in China, where they sort of discuss the nationalist forces and have some themed around that. Then, in 4th of August 2007, the game was released, and it was very popular according to the paper. It exceeded the expectations among the developers, and the servers were filled up with players quite quickly. And in 2008 and 2009, it reached one of the top 10 positions of many various online gaming ranking sites among China. And I think one of those ranking sites were focusing on Chinese games in particular. So, according to the game description of Resistance War Online, is to correctly guide the young gamer to deeply understand the profound significance of the war against Nazism. Yes, and that's according to the game description, according to the paper. So there might be some translation issues and some things, but I don't know. I haven't checked that out since I'm not very good in Chinese. And yeah, so the game is sort of red themed. It has many nationalistic values in them, since you're going to take part against the Japanese through the game. And many players were attracted to this sort of theme, according to the paper. And in 2010, the company released some player statistics where there were 90% males were playing the game, and most of them were over 30 years old. And the paper also argues that this was partly because this group of people have the buying force to buy various online items in the game, since you can buy weapons and things inside the game, so it's sort of microtransactional, sort of. And the game itself, it's a 2D game, and it's massive multiplayer online role-playing game, and it's mostly strategy-based. So while I was reading the paper, I sort of got slightly interested in what this thing was all about, and it seemed quite popular, so I should probably find some gameplay online. And I started looking up one of the first links that were listed in the paper as I was reading the paper sequentially, and I couldn't find the domain. It was non-existent. And I tried to look on various websites, Wayback Machine, on the Internet Web Archive, and I could not find the game. And it turned out that it was a new subdomain under, I think it was cqonline.com, where they published the game. And I fired up a virtual machine and got the game downloaded eventually, and installed it. I didn't want to install it on my main computer or host machine because it's, yeah, has some obvious reasons. So This is the character selection screen where you can create your own characters. And while I was trying to figure out how to play this, the characters that you can see here, especially, let's see here, these characters were not displayed correctly, so I needed some sort of encoding package in order to display them correctly. So that sort of took a while. And after that, it was sort of a game on itself to figure out how I'm going to play this game, since I don't understand Chinese. Like, this button was apparently log out. So I figured that out quite quickly. So I created various avatars or profiles, and I tried to get into the game and see sort of what it was all about. So this is the first screen you see when you get into the actual game itself. So I think this is some sort of tutorial where you have to do certain things, since in many online games you sort of have this tutorial base you have to go through. And yeah, so you have this 2D grid sort of isomorphic layout where you sort of click here and then your player goes there and you can talk to other people and various things. And it's you can see it's looks quite old, actually, in my opinion. I think since I sort of started thinking about one of the first games of Age of Empires when I saw this at the first time, since it doesn't actually look like it's from 2007, but that's my opinion. And there could be many games that sort of have this theme on purpose. I know at least here in the West we have various games which are supposed to look old on purpose. And yeah, this is the entire map where you can play around. So you can see that you have China here, and I think Japan is out here somewhere. Mm-hmm. It's an old map, and these various, I'm not sure if you can see this. There's all of these small spots here. They are cities where you can play. Yes. So how did this work in terms of propaganda? Well, sometimes, as Greg mentioned in this paper, it doesn't work the way you intend it to be. As in this game, you were supposed to fight together with the nationalist forces against Japanese, which is supposed to be your common enemy. However, the game allowed you to play against people on your own team, so you had faculties playing against each other, and that sort of disrupted the players from the actual gameplay and sort of the propaganda aspect of the game. So the paper claims that it was not very efficient according to that part. And another part was that it's also profit-driven, so you have to pay in order to get various items. And there was some people that were quite upset about this because you managed to get sort of a bad economy in the game. So you had several sort of, you had a rich group of players and a poor group of players, which sort of sliced the player group in the game, since it was quite hard for you as a new player to get into the game and get into the rich part of the players, since you apparently had to invest a lot of money in order to get to that group. And although the Chinese government managed to shift people's opinion of having to compare games towards drugs and very bad things in the 2003-4-ish, towards sort of being more okay with it. People were still skeptical, and they're very skeptical, especially towards patriotic education, which is what this paper claims this game is. And they are sort of skeptic because it's sort of, you have the addiction aspect around it, and many people claim that it sort of distorts historical facts, and it doesn't give the player a good actual, good understanding of the actual resistance war against Japan. And in the recent years, there's been a decline in user count according to the paper. I'm not sure how it has changed after the paper. was published, but they say that the user count has decreased in the last years, where the players have gone from Resistance War Online towards other imported online games. So, in conclusion, this paper sort of shows or tries to show how the Chinese government gives some sort of specification towards developers and companies where they implement some sort of game based on a set of theory or specification. And by doing that, they get benefits. They get funding from the government. They get various goods from the government, like they don't have to pay much taxes and so on and so forth. And they also say that they have managed to implement online games as a part of their propaganda system, as many people claimed when the internet started evolving that the regime or the government in China would sort of fall apart and lose their control of their public. However, it's been shown that the Chinese has been actually quite good at adapting to this new technology and being able to restrict how information spreads, for example, through the Chinese firewall is one example of that. Yeah, they've been able to adapt to the new technology that's come out. And as Greg also said in his presentation, it doesn't go the way you intend it to be when it comes all the time when it comes to propaganda. So you sort of have to be prepared that it might not be as effective as you intend it to be in the end. So that's all I have, and thank you for listening to my presentation.
Yeah. Yeah, great presentation.
Thank you.
Sort of to bash it. They're talking a lot about using propaganda as a weapon between the West. Between China and Japan, and probably Korea is making the games too in that mix. Do you see the war as a successful war by the Chinese government, using games as a weapon to sort of put down the Japanese?
Well, according to the paper, they say that they at least claim, as far as I understand, that they are able to some people are able to see the war as good, since they're able to use that as political resistance towards Japan, for example, in these type of games, which is I think they have a discussion about that.
Yeah, because they talk a lot about the game, and they say that the majority of the people are people that are familiar with conflict in some way, not directly in the conflict, because World War II was a long time ago and most people are dead. But sort of they knew a grandparent or a father or something who was in the war. So do you think, based on what the paper says and how it has sort of evolved, that these propaganda games will disappear into the future? Well, at least for this subject.
I don't know. However, they said in the paper that they said when they mentioned the user demographics of the game that they claimed that those people, as I said in the presentation as well, that most of the players were above 30 years old, and they also said that those who weren't and those that were younger were not very interested and didn't have very good knowledge about the resistance war, and they claimed that that was part of why they were not so into that game. However, how this changes towards in the newer age, I'm not sure, but I think that it would be reasonable to say that the Chinese will continue to post propaganda throughout their throughout various online games, since they had various projects where they were actually having I think it was one of the reforms that they had was that they were planning, actually, I think it was 100 games, where 20 of them were online, which were going to be pumped out to the public as culture, according to the government, since they saw online games as a part of culture at that time. So I think it will be more used. At least that's what I think. Yeah.
Yeah, because then again, all the claims in the paper, most of them at least, the claims about the Japanese games that they made to sort of bash the Chinese again, is from the Communist Youth Party's paper, which is directly controlled by the government. We sort of already know that the government is not doesn't give everybody a fair view on the subject. We think that there's a bad influence on the subject that they're reporting. I think that they're all reporting the Japanese games as much worse because the sources are from the Communist Party themselves.
Well, it's more about I think, not about like yeah.
Do you think it can be counted as an independent source in this way?
Well, as I said in the presentation, the Chinese are very restrictive when it comes to what the population should know, and I think it's sort of based around that why they sort of have this one-side argument towards the Japanese. In addition to they don't have actually very good relationships, so that sort of also contributes to how the relationship is, or at least how they see Japanese games, especially when the Japanese puts the Chinese people in a bad light. They sort of get more and more pissed at each other, so you sort of have this cyclic dependency where they get more pissed and they get to something and they get more pissed at them, and they, yeah, sort of cycle that goes around.
Yeah. Because in the article, it's written by, I actually couldn't find what the position actually was, but she was working at Oriental Studies at Oxford, and this is her first paper, written over some of the 3 years period, probably something like a PhD or something. Do you think the paper suffers from it being her first real publication?
Well, I would say that this paper says they come with a lot of statements, and they don't have, in many ways, they don't back it up with sources, which I would say is a very bad thing. And especially they list many sources, and they don't say the date when they accessed it. So when I was trying to access one of the websites, there were no date on when they tried to access it last time. And when I was going into Wayback Machine, when I was asked to enter the date when I want to access this website, I didn't know. So sort of had to try many dates in order to figure out which was the best date. And then I figured out, oh, they changed the websites. And yeah, but I don't want to say for sure if the paper suffers from being her first publication. That's a matter of personal opinion, and I don't feel that I have enough information to judge the author based on that. However, as I said, they have many claims in the paper without any source, and I agree with you that that's a very bad thing, and that's especially something that could be improved in this paper.
You can also see why we tell you to put the date access on web pages,
exactly.
right? It's the Wayback Machine.
I think that especially this paper sort of based itself around historical analysis, and the way we are able to interpret history has changed with the emergence of the internet and new technologies. And since the internet can sort of constantly evolve independently of other people, it becomes increasingly important to say when you access this resource the last time, since for obvious reasons that should be something that is obvious.
Then there's the language barrier that's really hard. For example, I was working with games that were talking about written in Middle Eastern, like Arabian, Arabic, and yours in Chinese. It's really hard to look on the sources.
Yeah. So I can show you guys on the paper. Let's see here. So this is not and as you can see here, they have here they translate the title of the paper. I think it's here. And they translate it, and that sort of made me kind of confused when I was looking at persistence or online that it's actually named Kaskan or something like that online in Chinese. And at one point, I think it's a good thing because I don't have to know Chinese in order to understand the title. However, when I look up this thing, I don't find the source at all, since that's not in Chinese letters. And yeah, that's sort of a problem. Another thing as well that I saw throughout the paper is that they are actually using symbols in the text. For example, the phrase "to kill two birds with one stone" was used several places in the paper, and that sort of use of symbolic in terms of a scientific article is, in my opinion, not a good idea, because you shouldn't you should say things straight out how they are, not sort of start to use symbolics and those sort of things. However, I think that could be because it's more common in Chinese to do this sort of way and this sort of thinking and writing. And I know that their entire character sets, or the way you type Chinese, is that all the symbols that you write are based on symbols that means some sort of thing. And I think that has sort of influenced the way that the author has written the paper.
You also get, yes, things that are, as you say, things that are easy to write, or things that are common things to say. So the one that I get irritated, well, there's two in Norwegian that I see quite, one that is humorous, which is lightning in a room. So instead of lighting, because lightning is very different to lighting. So that's a straight error. But one of the ones that you see is more like to kill two birds with one stone is the phrase nowadays, which you see Norwegians and a lot of Europeans use in English, but normal English speakers wouldn't use nowadays. In the same way, to kill two birds with one stone is a kind of idiom. It's an idiomatic statement, right? It's not an accurate thing. Nowadays is a very casual way of saying things in English, right? You wouldn't use it scientifically, but because the word in Norwegian and German and French, the concept of sort of currently translates directly to nowadays. When you look it up in Google Translate, people use that phrase, and it's a very, very casual one which you wouldn't normally use. So in the same way you're saying here that to kill two birds with one stone is, you could have said to achieve two objectives with the same action.
Yeah.
Right?
That would be more appropriate.
That's actually what they're trying to do. But yeah, so it's as you say, it's often because when you think in a language and you directly translate it, you have some of these issues. But yep, okay.
Yeah, it says in the conclusion that state-sponsored patriotic online games shows that they managed to successfully integrate it into the party machine. You probably have.
I have it here somewhere.
Yeah, you can probably find it if you want to.
Should we? I think it's this phrase. Yeah.
Successfully integrated online games into the national propaganda machine.
Yes.
Like, can they really say that? They're talking a lot about this game not being played by too many people, and it's being also competed by foreign games. In addition to the only players that are successful in the game are people with large amount of wealth that can buy the necessary in-game items. So it enforces capitalistic views, and not too many people are playing it. Can we really say that is a really successful integration?
Well, what they are saying here is that they have been able to enforce online games into their propaganda machine. And what they kind of base this claim on is part of Resistance War Online. Whether that was a successful implementation of propaganda or not is, like I said in my presentation, it's yes and no in some parts. And however, the fact that it was one of the most popular online games in 2007 and 2008 in China, and that it sort of has the Chinese elements in them. It's sort of a red theme game. Sort of shows that it's actually it is sort of contributing in one way or another to sending the message of the government by applying to their actual step-by-step history and those things. And they also list many other games, and as well as the other projects that the government had, where Resistance War Online apparently was one of many other projects. And I would say that they have been able to integrate online games into their propaganda system. And what I think that they mean with successfully is that they have been able to integrate online games into their propaganda machine. However, whether the actual effects of the propaganda is successful or not is another story, which is also briefly discussed in the paper. And they also mentioned that it's sort of ironic as well that they have this game where you have to buy in-game items, which is sort of a Western thing, sort of a capitalist way of thinking. And it's also against what the paper also says, is that they want to have this this very good, stable population where you don't have these classes, sort of. And this game sort of goes against that. In addition to that, it also introduces, according to the paper, other globalized values such as manga from Japan. I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with that. It's Japanese cartoons. And the game itself sort of has this kind of theme. And many other games also are very anime-like, and they sort of show and base their layouts on that instead of actually showing the red Chinese way, which is sort of, yeah. So, yeah.
That's all the questions I have.
Okay. Yep. Thank you. Okay. In terms of just finishing off, because it's at 12 o'clock, so we can head away. This is you two very different papers in the sense that, or two kind of different situations. So the Middle East with with Syria, you found one Middle Eastern kind of game development company, and not much infrastructure and not much support environment for the development of games in the Middle East. China has a massive tech industry, right, and has the ability to spend massive resource doing this, right? So one of the interesting things and some of the discussions are around the resource China has to create propaganda games. They can fund a lot more development, but just funding it means you can get it more polished. But at some point, will it actually be effective?
And often when we talk about propaganda, you have to look at your audience, and you have to start talking about rhetoric. Right? So one of the things we spend a lot of time to talk about is the rhetoric approaches to propaganda, and also the target audience. Right? So in this case, if you are trying to convince people who already believe something, in English, one of the things we do call this is preaching to the choir, right? Where you go to people who already believe your message, and you reinforce that message with them, right? Now, that's usually not considered very effective ways of converting more people to your cause, right? Because if you only can talk to people who already believe you, yeah, and if I go to Catholic mass on a Sunday and talk about how wonderful God is, people are going to go, yeah, right, and they're going to agree because they're already there. Is it going to increase the number of Catholics to do that? Probably not, because everyone's already actively turning up and participating. So with these propaganda games, your question about are they actually rolled in? Are they effective? What target market are they actually getting to, and how are they changing their behavior? So in standard propaganda, we think of kind of a triage. We think of the 3 layers of the audience. You have the people who believe you and are already dedicated to the cause, right? You don't need to do much for them. You have the people who will never ever be on your side, right? So they're lost. And then you have the people in the middle who you might be able to convince with good arguments, or with showing particular things or presenting particular information. And so if you're wanting to increase the number of people who believe your side of any discussion, then your propaganda is best aimed at that middle group rather than at either end, right? So it's not much point trying to target Texans to get them to love Islam, right? Because a bunch of them did work. Whereas moderate Western countries, you might be able to find more people who are willing to be tolerant and listen to the message, right? So in all of this, understanding who these games are targeted at. Now the Chinese, the last game, as you said, 90% male, 80% over 30, a lot of them with money. A lot of them didn't seem like they're choosing to play this game is more of an act of patriotism rather than as a conversion to patriotism, right? So it's not really them spending money on increasing the amount of patriotism in the country. It's spending money on getting people who are already patriotic to show a symbol of their patriotism, right? And so it has been rolled in, but I also don't know if it's effective yet. And I don't know if it will be effective. Information has a tendency to make propaganda harder to maintain. Right? So China is doing a reasonable job of doing this, and Russia is doing a reasonable job of promoting particular opinions by propaganda means. But I think, like the fact that we have a bunch of students from Norway here having these discussions means that the spread of different views are harder to compete, harder to kind of completely block than they have been in the past. And so this is one of the big deals with Iran at the moment, is one of the reasons why a lot of Western countries are wanting to drop restrictions on Iran, is to bring them into the fold and start having information going back and forth to try and change the views of the population. Because once you exclude people, once you say, right, you guys can't visit us, you can't come here, you can't have any of our stuff, then the propaganda machine in that country can operate overtime and do a fantastic job of saying, hey, those guys are the enemy, right? The us and them mentality. And these are both us and them mentality games, right?
They actually have something familiar in North Korea, where they have a university where they get lecturers from the US and the West in general to lecture people, as they want them to spread out sort of their ideas and those things, and sort of make people start thinking about various things in North Korea. So they managed to get an influence based on exactly that.
Yeah, trying to get information and try and use universities to do it. So yeah, all of these, I suppose at the nature, using people's instincts to have an us and them, to have you're either with us or against us kind of mentality. You're seeing it very strongly in America at the moment. And when either side start moving into the us and them mentality, it's very easy to run propaganda to demonize the enemy, particularly when an enemy is trying to demonize you. So I think we are heading to quite a terrifying potential for more and more propaganda-based games and more us and them style dialogues, right? And I think one of our responsibilities as serious game developers is to be aware of the challenge, right? Particularly to think about the propaganda that is implicit in the way we do things, right? So, for example, the budget game we had last week, the idea that you can turn every moral decision into a how much money you spend on it decision, right? And that's a piece of propaganda, right? That's propaganda about everything is just about money, right? You can avoid, like, so when people say, "I'll follow the money," they talk. This is one of the discussions they had about why the Bush administration and most American administrations found tracking down Al-Qaeda leaders and understanding Al-Qaeda very difficult, because they tried to follow the money and it didn't lead them to where they thought it would, right? Because in America, you control the money, you control the organization. And they just didn't understand that you could be a religious leader and not have any control over any funding mechanisms and still be in control, right? This just couldn't understand the mechanics of how that would work, right? And it's just that lack of understanding around not everything is about money that makes it hard for some cultures to understand other cultures. And so when you're playing propaganda, that's also one of those implicit things about your culture that you don't see, right? So I know the analogy sometimes used is does a fish notice it's swimming in water? Right? Because does a fish really have a concept of water? Because it's everywhere. It's never not been in water. So that's its existence, right? So it probably doesn't need a concept of water to survive, because you don't notice something that's always there. And that's the challenge we have as serious game developers. When we make games and we're trying to educate people, we're trying to get a health outcome, or we're trying to promote a particular worldview, understanding our own worldview is one of the critical things there, and understanding how other people see us. Which is why I think it's so great to have some foreign students here who can give us some different impressions on what they think of the games we make. And it's useful to use your fellow students to test things and give you feedback saying, well, that's a bit weird, just because it's not the way they would do things. Okay, so any last questions, comments? No? Okay, so we'll see you on the 25th, so a week from Thursday for the all review. I will send out the paper on GoRads tonight, tomorrow, and you guys can have a look at it. And we'll have the last of these three as the other paper. So we'll do 2 papers on Thursday week, the 25th. Okay, great, thank you. The social sciences papers can be quite tricky because, yeah, sometimes they use really strange things, and weird way of phrasing things is just so different. But you know, it's serious games. It's not just the tech. You also have to start thinking about the wider areas. Okay, bye internet people. Sorry for my computer crashing halfway through.